talking about the comet. Say it's an omen. Say it means Rob will win a great victory in the south.
Did they? I heard some other fools say it's Lannister red. Means the Lannisters will rule all 7 kingdoms before long. I heard a stable boy say it's the colour of blood. Mark the death of your father. The stars don't fall from men. Red comet means one thing, boy. Dragons.
The dragons are all dead. Been dead for centuries.
The object allegedly changed Earth's orbit and axis, causing innumerable catastrophes that are mentioned in early mythologies and religions from around the world, like the Great Flood, like this, like all kinds of things. The book has been heavily criticized as a work of pseudoscience and catastrophicism. Many of its claims are completely rejected by established scientific community as they are not supported by any available evidence. Wrong, 100% wrong, and it's always been wrong, and they destroyed him as an act of vengeance against him standing up for reality.
Years ago, in 1950, an amazingly unconventional thinker astounded the scientific community with a theory that challenged many of its most deeply rooted assumptions. In a persuasive bestseller, this man presented a radical view of world history that linked research and hypotheses in such diverse disciplines as astronomy, geology, comparative religion, and archaeology. A storm of protest arose from every corner of this academic world, claiming that the theory was totally wrong.
What's most important are the questions he raised. So here's the background. Velikovsky wrote his most important book, Worlds in Collision, during the 1940s. By 1950, Macmillan, one of the largest publishers in America, had agreed to publish the book. And that's when all hell broke loose.
This opposition soon turned into an attempt to suppress the book and discredit the man who wrote it. The man is Immanuel Velikovsky, Russian-born doctor and psychoanalyst, student of the sciences and humanities, founder and one-time editor of the Scripta Universitatis series, out of which grew the Hebrew University in Jerusalem.
If cosmic upheavals occurred in the historical past, why doesn't the human race remember them? And why is it necessary to carry on research to find out about them?
He's founded his theory on the ancient records of man from all over the world, on archaeological evidence in the form of ancient calendars that have become strangely obsolete. In addition, Dr. Velikovsky's theory has led him to re-examine prevailing views regarding the origins of religion, as well as those which form the basis of celestial mechanics.
The speaker yesterday showed us that the LIGO experiment, which said it had detected gravitational waves, is nonsense. They had fiddled with the numbers, and it's really a fraud. So, in effect, gravity is unprovable. And I would go so far as to say that it may turn out to be wrong. To start off, 76 names, and I counted them, and most of them are prominent major biologists, all of whom disagree partly or completely with Darwin, and then at the end they throw in there's hundreds more. So I think Darwin is completely dead. He makes no sense whatever, and I think Velikovsky was perfectly within his rights to deny Darwin and to deny the theory of gravity.
And he also calls for a realignment of the chronologies of ancient civilizations.
Only a test. This is a dragon. That is his fluty things. This is his neck. That is the scales on his neck. Here we go in and look at his neck. And those are the dragon scales that go down his neck. I want to do this in less than 2 minutes to show you this giant dragon that is laying decaying in the desert in this is the Atlas Mountains. This is Morocco. Now that's all the effluent running off his dead decaying body, and he is absolutely enormous. He comes all the way down. That is his body. There's his legs, and that is his tail. And over here you can see his tail. Now you do have Google Earth, I'm sure, so I am going to really fly through this. Now he is attacking a giant fish. And that right there, my friends, is the stuff that he spit out at the giant fish. It is extremely noxious. And I have found and you will too, if you look at this very carefully, if you come way back up in here, this right in his throat is the injectors. You see, these are the red and the green injectors. Ooh, nastiness flows from there. Now, what did he try to do? He tried to kill that fish. And he attacked him on his fin, and it attacked his vital flesh. And that is a fish, gigantic, very large fish, over the top of Atlantis, right here. And I have shown the boats and so forth right in their slips over in this area somewhere. They're all over the place here. And these are the buildings. You know, it's all right in here. So I want to get out of here quick so that you can see this fast. Share it with your friends. It all ran out here. This was a huge flood. I can see all the top people now are talking about these kind of things. I've been bringing this forward for years.
The trader from Karth told me that dragons come from the moon.
The moon?
He told me the moon was an egg, Khaleesi. That once there were 2 moons in the sky. But one wandered too close to the sun and it cracked from the heat. Out of it poured 1,000 dragons, and they drank the sun's fire.
Okay, here's the map I was referring to now, and it gets really detailed. But remember, Atlantis was over here, all right, coming in off of the ocean. There's the really fancy looking Atlantis balls. And then here's the dragon. There's the head of the dragon. There's his throat chopped right there. These are the dragon scales. And it runs the entire length of North Africa, all the way across the top of North Africa until you hit the Red Sea. They knew so much about our world that we don't even have a clue about. Now, the other one that I want you to pay attention to is the dragon here, right in the center of Europe. Because I have some information about that. It's a startling information, by the way. By the way, I believe this map is from 1375. I have some, I don't know why I have this down. Atlas, Catalan, Abraham, Kresk.
Alright, we're getting ready to talk about science and magic, and this is very controversial, so we're going to keep our voices down. And I brought you in a little closer. Here we have very ancient legends telling us about the cracking of a moon, and about the moon meteor dragons that came flying out. This is exactly the sort of thing that could have caused a long night type of scenario. And that's before we factor in the inevitable layer of magic. And by that, I mean this. Magic in A Song of Ice and Fire seems to be rooted in the elements. And the elements are often the conduits of magical power. Now we all know that the Danes supposedly made a magic sword from a fallen meteorite, referred to as a pale stone of magic powers by the maesters in the world of ice and fire. This is a really good clue that meteors can indeed be magical in this story. The World of Ice and Fire also serves up a legend from far eastern Essos about a great empire of the dawn, which supposedly collapsed at the time of the Long Night, and the guy held responsible, some evil dude named the Bloodstone Emperor, was said to worship a black stone that fell from the sky, and also to practice every kind of dark magic. That's another clue about meteor activity around the time of the Long Night, and another clue about magic tied to meteors. And even the guy's name, Bloodstone, kind of sounds like a comet, which is a flying stone regarded as a bleeding star, a bloody stone. Azor Ahai actually comes in at the end of that great Empire of the Dawn story, encouraging us to think that this fable and its black meteor might be connected to the rumored moon cracking activity in the Azor Ahai myth.
What we're looking for the first time around. A comet appears coming out of the sun. I'll zoom in on it here, heading at the 8 o'clock position. And so maybe you can guess why we showed back to the last couple of days of April. At slowest, sun-diving comets take 2 days to reach the sun once appearing on this frame, and so we'd definitely be catching the incoming comet in the hours to day or so before it appears popping out the left side of the central opaque blocking disk. Now I invite you to check this and the C2 cameras during this time frame for yourself and verify that not only does it look like something moon to planet sized fires out of the sun, there's absolutely no evidence of an incomer swinging around, coming in, or anything. There is absolutely no chance it didn't brighten initially. All incoming comets go wild once they get inside Mercury's orbit due to intense photoionization, photoelectric effects, and charged particle bombardment in the solar wind. But then again, the sun isn't supposed to spit out comets, moons, or planets either. Or is it? That's why, while we continue to monitor the comets and asteroids around today, and while we can confirm that SWAN and the latest from the Atlas Observatory are not as interesting as the internet is saying, certainly nowhere near as interesting as some of the ones we've covered the last decade. Heck, when you hear people talking about a Jupiter or larger size coma, remember Comet Neats, larger than the sun, coming very close to the sun, and we're still here. But things like the 1997 planetary-sized ejection from the sun is a real mystery. I saw absolutely no incoming comet, and heck, for all we know, that's a ship coming out of a Stargate. I've never been up there to confirm that those are sci-fi bits of nonsense, and neither have you, despite how good we think we are at the physics. Mystery unsolved.
So, when a comet or meteor impacts on the Earth, the enormous amount of smoke, ash, and debris thrown into the atmosphere can be so great that it turns out the lights, so to speak, for several years, leaving the daytime gray and very overcast, and the nights pitch black with no stars.
The events in the sky were viewed by the peoples of the world as a fight between an evil monster in the form of a serpent and the light god who engaged the monster in battle and thus saved the world. The tail of the comet, leaping back and forth under the discharges of the flaming globe, was regarded as a separate body inimical to the globe of the comet. Apollodorus' description of the battle between Zeus and Typhon. His body was all winged, and fire flashed from his eyes. Such and so great was Typhon, when, hurling kindled rocks, he made for the very heaven with hissing and shouts, spouting a great jet of fire from his mouth. To the sky of Egypt, Zeus pursued Typhon, rushing at heaven. Zeus pelted Typhon at a distance with thunderbolts. The struggle left deep marks on the entire ancient world. Some districts were especially associated with the events of this cosmic fight. The Egyptian shore of the Red Sea was called Typhonia. One of the places of the heavenly combat between elementary forces of nature, as narrated by Apollodorus and Strabo, was on the way from Egypt to Syria. According to Herodotus, The final act of the fight between Zeus and Typhon took place at Lake Serbon on the coastal route from Egypt to Palestine. Isaiah prophesied for the future. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. The crooked serpent is shown in many ancient pictures, from China to India to Persia to Assyria to Egypt and to Mexico.
And what happened? Well, they collapsed. Just after 1200 BC, everything that had been going very nicely for several centuries by this point comes to a crashing halt on either side of 1200 BC. Right, everybody that I just mentioned goes down. We get a dark age that lasts for between 150 and 300 years.
I claim that was the post-flood era. So up until this particular time, they were screwing around with all kind of DNA and monsters and crazy things. You see them on the walls. I'm not making this up. It's everywhere. And then that we had the Great Flood. Now, what caused the Great Flood? I'm not 100% certain, but
this was a huge loss to the world. We're not really sure what caused it. So that's what I want to talk about mostly today, are the possible explanations for what caused that collapse, and then see if maybe we should start going, yeah, all right, so.
The Battle of the Gods, the comet-dragon catastrophe, the Exodus, the law-giving, all occurred at the end of the Bronze Age. The great discharges of interplanetary force are commemorated in the traditions, legends, and mythology of all the peoples of the world. The god Zeus of the Greeks, Odin of the Icelanders, Ukko of the Finns, Perun of the Russian pagans, Woden of the Germans, Mazda of the Persians, Marduk of the Babylonians, Shiva of the Hindus, is pictured with lightning in his hand and described as the god who threw his thunderbolt at the world, overwhelmed with water and fire. The mythology which personified the forces of the cosmic drama described the world as colored red. In one Egyptian myth, the bloody hue of the world is ascribed to the blood of Osiris, the mortally wounded planet god associated to Saturn. In another myth, it is the blood of Seth, or Apapi. In the Babylonian myth, the world was colored red by the blood of the slain Tiamat, the heavenly monster. The rabbinical tradition, contradicting the spirit of the scriptural narrative of the Bible today, states that during the plague of darkness, the vast majority of the Israelites perished, and that only a small fraction of the original Israelite population of Egypt was spared to leave Egypt. 49 out of every 50 Israelites are said to have perished in this plague. Hieronymus wrote in an epistle that in the night in which the Exodus took place, all the temples of Egypt were destroyed either by earth shock or by the thunderbolt. Similarly, in the Midrashim, the seventh plague, the plague of the Barad, meaning earthquakes, fire, and meteorites, it is said that the structures that were built by the Israelite slaves and Ramses collapsed, or were swollen by the earth. The head of the celestial body, comet-dragon, approached very close, breaking through the darkness, and according to the Midrashim, the last night in Egypt was as bright as the noon on the day of the summer solstice. The population fled. Tents are what they make like the dwellers of hills, wrote Ikur. The population of a city destroyed by an earthquake usually spends the nights in the fields. The book of Exodus describes a hurried flight from Egypt on the night of the 10th plague. A mixed multitude of non-Israelites left Egypt together with the Israelites, who spent their first night in Sukkoth. The traditions of many peoples throughout the world persist that seas were torn apart and their water heaped high and thrown upon the continents. According to the Chinese annals, the water of the ocean was heaped up and cast upon the continent of Asia. A great tidal wave swept over the mountains and broke in the middle of the Chinese Empire. The water was caught in the valleys between the mountains, and the land was flooded for decades. The Hebrew story of the passage of the sea contains the same elements. The last day of the darkness was at the Red Sea. When the world plunged out of the darkness, the bottom of the sea was uncovered. The waters were driven apart and heaped up like walls in a double tide. Then the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, broke into the Red Sea in an enormous tidal wave. Although the larger part of the Israelite fugitives were already out of reach of the falling tidal waves, a great number of them perished in this disaster, as in the previous ones of fire and hurricane of cinders. These tidal waves also overwhelmed entire tribes who inhabited Tehama, the 1,000-mile-long coastal region of the Red Sea. Celestial body of the great comet Dragon made contact with electrical discharges. It retreated and approached again. According to Hesiod, the huge earth groaned when Zeus lashed Typhon with his bolts. The earth resounded terribly, and the wide heavens above. Velikovsky's book, Worlds in Collision, became widely discredited in 1950. It was followed up years later by the movie The Ten Commandments in 1956. The movie's depiction of Moses and the Exodus tell a very different story as to how the events unfolded.
I commend you to your Hebrew God, who has no name. If you die, it will be by his hand, not by mine.
The story aligns itself closely to the biblical account of the Pentateuch, and it was a much more orderly affair after the plagues that befell Egypt.
One of the interesting questions that Velikovsky's work raises for the study of religion reopens the question which a lot of scholars are no longer too interested in, that is the origin of religion. Velikovsky opens the question again as to the possible astral origin. Why did the ancients worship stars or planets that the average person can't pick out of the sky today? And yet all of our ancient heritage that comes to us in terms of architecture, writing, and so on, they're actually obsessed with the idea of worshiping these stars, these dreaded planets. All mankind through the years have worshipped stars that we can't even pick out of the sky today. Now why? Why were they so obsessed with them? Unless in some way these stars were threats to them, in some way impressed themselves upon ancient man.
The catastrophes described in ancient sources were traumatic experiences common to all mankind. Purged from conscious memory, these records are now interpreted as allegories, metaphors, and the trauma has been submerged in the unconscious. Velikovsky calls this collective amnesia.